We're in downtown Los Gatos, and it's a little bit earlier than I had planned to go live, but we've got a lot of things going on today, and so we're going to talk about them and show you things in the background that will help you remember and understand what's going on. So that's the Los Gatos movie theater in downtown Los Gatos. It was purchased by some sisters in, I think, about 2010. It might have been a little after that. And it was recently purchased by the town. So the town owns that movie theater. Hello, John Denicola. You never disappoint, by the way. And it is still only 10:24 in the morning here. And I'm a little bit early because we are going to end up doing 3 live streams today. John, can you hear me okay? Because it's really loud. I do have new headphones. I just went to the Apple store and got some new headphones, but I want to make sure that you can hear okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about 3 things. First, we're going to talk about the trial of the attorney who is being charged with malpractice, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty downtown. And right now that trial is going on. It was in the morning. The attorneys were going to argue without the presence of the jury about whether or not the fiduciary duty claim should still be live, meaning can the jury rule on fiduciary duties. And I just want to recap some of the things that the week long that the jury was gone and we did our live streams that people told us was going on in that courtroom, court observers. And not all of them are trained lawyers, and so they see things differently. They see things more the way a jury would see things. And there's a lot of boring moments in a trial where they're putting things into evidence, and most of us don't understand that whole process, but it's very boring. If the attorneys won't agree that the evidence can come in or stipulate to it, then you have to get it into evidence so that the jury can consider it. Because if it's not into evidence by the way of documents or witness testimony, it doesn't get considered. So the week before, Mark Erickson was being cross-examined before they had to change the schedule up a little bit. Mark Erickson is the divorce attorney who is currently on trial. He didn't offer to settle the case, which, think about that for a minute. A divorce attorney who is being charged with failing to protect their client and causing them harm doesn't want to settle, doesn't want to negotiate. And those are the kinds of attorneys that are likely to continue to fight because they profit from the fight. You don't benefit from the fight because you have to keep paying them. And a really good attorney knows how to settle differences, especially when people are involved in a divorce or a bad breakup. And they need an attorney to guide them through what legally has to be done and be able to ignore what emotionally gets in the way a lot of times. And there are certain attorneys in every community that are called the litigators. Somebody put in a comment, Bill Dresser. Bill Dresser is another attorney like Mark Erickson. So we're going to start to classify the kinds of attorneys that fancy themselves. They actually pay for, and Mark Erickson testified about this. He told the jury that he was, one, a certified family law attorney. That means that an attorney that is licensed can go and pay for more licensing to be certified in a certain area of practice. So they can be a family law attorney, they could be a criminal defense attorney, a personal injury, whatever it is. Somebody just sent me a text message about court reporters. That's very interesting. I'll go over that in a little bit. And so lawyers specialize. And the best way to think about that is like the way that we think about doctors. If you have something wrong with your head, you're not going to go to a foot doctor. And doctors specialize as well. When you're a child, you use a pediatrician. So Mark Erickson, when he was testifying, said he was a super lawyer, and he told the jury that. And the jury are everyday people like us. We don't know what a super lawyer is. Well, let me tell you what a super lawyer is. A super lawyer is a totally rigged marketing scheme designed by and for the benefit of lawyers. And they get a little designation that says they're a super lawyer, but they have to pay for it. So if you look at superlawyer.com, they have a website about how you become a super lawyer, and they make it look like it's this great big research team that goes out and finds these terrific attorneys. No, it's a marketing team, and you're paying to get that designation as a super lawyer. So Mark Erickson is just full of hot air, telling a jury he's a super lawyer as if that's relevant or anything else. So we listened to what people told us about Mark Erickson's testimony. And the other thing that he said was that he didn't want to tell his client that he shouldn't sign this agreement that the private judge was shoving down his throat because he didn't want to get fired. What? Think about that. Your attorney that you hire and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars doesn't want to stop you from signing an agreement that's going to cost you millions of dollars because they don't want to get fired. Does that make sense? So at the core of this case is that Mark Erickson failed to protect his client, costing him millions of dollars. And this is a client who was on a second or third divorce. It was all about his separate property. It wasn't rocket science. And the super lawyer, Mark Erickson, failed to protect him. But there was also something else interesting that was raised. And Mark Erickson brought up the issue that while he was representing this client that is now suing him, that the client was flirting with his paralegal, Lisa Morey. And we heard a lot from other clients of Mark Erickson about Lisa Morey. And Lisa Morey and most paralegals, they know the dirt. They don't have attorney-client privilege. So it is up to the attorney to manage and supervise the paralegals. But those paralegals go out to the bars, they talk to other attorneys, they talk to other paralegals, and all the information that you think is protected under this attorney-client privilege literally becomes gossip downtown at night when those paralegals get off work. Yes, whoever just said leakers. The paralegals are the leakers. And I have some great paralegal sources that give me information that would just knock your socks off. And so I do appreciate good paralegals. I appreciate the information they give me. They always direct me where to look, and not necessarily violating any privilege or any terms of their employment, but they are very helpful. They can also be very harmful. And Lisa Morey, Mark Erickson testified that he saw his former client flirting with his paralegal, Lisa Morey, through the window. I haven't seen the transcript, but that was roughly what the testimony was about. So think about that. Mark Erickson's on trial for failing to protect his client, costing him millions of dollars. And what does he bring up as his defense? That his client flirted, his client, by the way, now is 81 years old, and that he flirted with Lisa Morey. So I'm going to be writing an article about paralegals and the problem that they are, especially the paralegals of private judges. But what was really interesting is, as Mark Erickson focused on Lisa Morey, what he forgot to tell was that Lisa Morey went to work for the law firm representing his client's wife. Okay, now I want you to picture this. You're hiring an attorney and you're paying them tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to protect you in a divorce where your ex-wife is exhibiting signs of being a gold digger. She wanted his property. And the jewel of the community property was this Almaden Valley property that was out in San Jose's Almaden Valley. And there were a lot of shenanigans going on. And so that was when Mark Erickson's client, Richard, went to Mark Erickson and asked him to protect him, make sure that his separate property, his pensions, everything that he had before marriage, the prenup that he had signed, that was all protected. And Mark Erickson, through sheer incompetence or being corrupt, but while acting as a super lawyer, had this client hire a private judge and then didn't put any effort into, puppy's sleeping on the job again today, didn't put any effort into protecting that client or his assets, took him to a private judge meeting without giving him any advice or instructions about how he might settle the case. He had drafted a marital settlement agreement to try to settle it, but David Patton's firm and the ex-wife rejected it. And then he just did nothing else. And he walked into the private judge's office and they strong-armed the client into signing this agreement that ended up costing the client millions of dollars, everything that he had saved up in his whole entire life. And this client had the resources and the wherewithal to file a malpractice lawsuit against Mark Erickson within a year. But most clients don't have the money to do that. And I wrote this weekend an article in the Davis Vanguard. I put it in my community posts, and I think the link is there to it. And that was an article about another Mark Erickson client, Jane Doe 1, who we also refer to as Kathleen. And she was from Los Gatos. And I met her, I think it was in 2017 or 18. And she became probably one of my best sources. She had hired all these different attorneys, and she was from Los Gatos. So she could get me information. She was also a real estate broker, and she could get me information. And I want to tell you the best information that she ever got, because you guys are going to like this. So we were reporting on the Thomas Giardi, the lawyer who was sued for RICO-like activity. I don't know, it was all felony crimes, stealing money, and not a little bit of money, but millions of dollars from his clients who were vulnerable individuals. They were elderly, they were fire victims, they were orphans, they were victims of plane crashes. And Thomas Giardi would get millions and millions of dollars of settlements, and then he would cream it off. And he wouldn't give it to his clients, or he would just outright steal it. He used the money to have an affair with an appellate court judge. That's in a lot of the reporting that we did. He donated to all the Democrats in California. There was an article about that. So Gavin Newsom, Barbara Boxer, Dianne Feinstein, a lot of the money that he took from his clients went to support the political campaigns of those individuals. So we reported on that, and the FBI started looking at, whenever you guys say, call the FBI, call the DOJ, let me tell you how that really works. So Jane, or Kathleen, and I were reading the reporting that the LA Times was doing, knowing that we were doing a lot of that work too. So we were kind of fact-checking what the LA Times was saying. And the LA Times reported that Thomas Giardi had a paralegal or a secretary, like the Lisa Mori, and the secretary had gotten a house. And it had come through another attorney that was up here, and the house was in Carmel. And they said something about the house that didn't feel right. And when you have local knowledge of an area, which we do in Los Gatos and some other places up here, you can detect when reporters don't have that knowledge and don't understand. And so they wrote something about the Carmel property. And in Carmel, they don't put addresses on the property. So I was trying to look up the property and the ownership of it, but I didn't have an address. In Carmel, they actually name their houses like ships. So you'll see different names on the houses, but no addresses. I've never quite figured out how the post office delivers to those houses, but that's what they do in Carmel. And so when we started to look it up, we realized that it wasn't in Carmel. It was in an area called Carmel Highlands. And Kathleen helped me get the address for it. And we got the address, and we looked up the history of the property. And the property had gone from Thomas Giardi to a lawyer up here. And then a couple of months before the FBI investigation, the mother who had gotten the property for being Tom Giardi's paralegal transferred it to her son. And her son was the head of the FBI investigating Tom Giardi. So, how you can fact check that I'm right on this, I emailed the FBI on a Friday, and I said, by the way, you have just assigned an investigator to the Thomas Giardi case who may or may not be Thomas Giardi's son, but is definitely the son of his paralegal, and he got quitclaimed the house that the paralegal was given from Thomas Giardi. The next morning, that individual was on the news recusing from the investigation. So that's the kind of shenanigans that will go on every day in private and in government business. And if we don't watchdog it, they get away with it. And that FBI agent would have never recused if I didn't find out that he had just gotten the house that appeared to be cycled through so that it became the property of the FBI investigator who was actually working on it out of LA. And he recused, but you have to wonder, okay, so you recused from the investigation. How long were you in it? Did you destroy any evidence? Did you redirect the investigation to protect Tom Giardi? And I don't think anybody ever looked into that. Tom Giardi was convicted. He is, I think, serving out a prison sentence, but he's so old, it really just doesn't matter. He lived a life of just stealing and harming all these people, and he did it as a super lawyer. That's what a super lawyer is. Somebody who pays money to promote their business and tell everybody what a great lawyer they are. And that's what a super lawyer is. And that's what Mark Erickson wanted a jury to know that he was. So this morning in that case, Mark Erickson will testify. They will cross-examine him. There will be motions in limine that they're going to have the judge rule on. And then they're going to do closing arguments. And that's the moment like we all see in the John Grisham movies. And this doesn't happen in family court. And it rarely happens in criminal court. And the reason it doesn't happen in criminal court is because the prosecutors typically do these coercive plea deals and get people to plea to crimes because the threat, and they call it a criminal defense attorney source taught me this, it's called a trial tax. That if you go to trial instead of taking the plea deal, then the judge is informed of that, and if you are convicted by a jury, the judge is more likely to sentence you more harshly for failing to take the plea deal. So that's called a trial tax. So going to trial is always costly. It's always risky. You don't know how the jury is going to rule. And so today there are a number of court watchers down there at the courthouse, so I decided I didn't need to be there because we have been training people how to watch these proceedings. We are verifying what they're saying and they're seeing, but we thought it would be far better to have everyday members of the public watching that proceeding and seeing what they think instead of waiting until the jury comes back. So that's how we're going to report on this, and I'm going to let you know as soon as the jury comes back. I might even do a live stream tonight to kind of update what has happened in the trial today. But the last time that Mark Erickson was on the stand before they went on their week break, he was testifying about being a super lawyer and his client flirting through the glass with his paralegal, Lisa Morey, who actually went to work for the law firm representing his client's wife. And so I want to talk about that because a paralegal, there was a case that we followed involving some very wealthy people. Puppy is barking right now. I don't know what she wants. She's having a little senior moment. And there was an attorney, Brad Baugh, who was representing, no, you can't bark right now, who was representing the husband in the case. His name was Drew Perkins. And the lawyers who don't know much about things outside of court were, we have to pat Puppy and get her a little calmer right now. They were, the husband reportedly, and this was according to a process server, came into Brad Baugh's office and put a blank check on his desk and said, make my ex-wife's life miserable. And so we know that is potential in every divorce case. And there are attorneys that will just take that money and do that. And Brad Baugh reportedly made $15 million in that divorce case, but he got disqualified. And let me tell you how he got disqualified. Brad Baugh was one of the most notorious attorneys here, and he also represented Kathleen before Mark Erickson. He's represented a number of people in the area that have had really problematic cases. And he was known for doing things like coordinating with therapists so that they would write reports the way that he wanted them written for his client, so his client would have a benefit related to child custody. He was known for being able to keep discovery from being blocked from the wealthy individuals that he represented, but he did have a pattern of throwing a lot of the women under the bus. And while this is not usually a gender issue, divorce attorneys have to take both male and female clients. And if they don't, they can get in trouble with the bar. And so Brad Baugh would take his female clients, but he would throw them under the bus, very much the way Mark Erickson is being accused of doing in the malpractice trial. But by the time a lot of these women figured out what Mr. Baugh had done to them, they didn't have the money, the resources, or the wherewithal to sue him in court. Because before you sue your attorney, and you guys are always saying, sue, just sue, you have to realize what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And the trial of Mark Erickson has taken 5 years. So in the case where Brad Baugh got disqualified, he had a paralegal whose sister was working for the other law firm representing the wife. And Brad Baugh met her and went and got her to come work for him because he had all the money from his rich client that wanted to make his wife's life miserable. And so he was willing to pay to do those kind of shenanigans. To get Brad Baugh removed from the case for what he did, which was completely unethical, and this is why. When you're a paralegal and you're working for somebody and they know your secrets, your lawyer's strategy, they know what's going on, and they know the intimate parts of your case, if that lawyer picks up and goes to work for the other side, then they're going to tell, or are likely to tell, things that will give that side an advantage. And think about this no differently than a paralegal working for a prosecutor or a criminal defense attorney. Say they're working for a criminal defense attorney, and then they go and work for the prosecutor. Odds are they're going to talk about it. So in the case where Brad Baugh got disqualified, it was in front of Judge Persky, who is the judge that got recalled. And Brad Baugh was arguing Walter Hammond, Robin Yeamans, and Catherine Schlepphorst. And Catherine Schlepphorst is in my videos. She's one of those minors counsel, highest paid minors counsel. She's made $600,000 from taxpayers off representing kids. And she's a questionable attorney. I've had some definite issues with Catherine Schlepphorst and some records that I've gotten. But they had to hire a Richard Flamm, who is an expert witness. And this was back in the early 2000s. And that expert witness cost $40,000. So unless you have the money to pay a lawyer, or the lawyer agrees to front all your costs, pay experts, pay court transcripts, pay court costs, pay the time for your lawyer, pay a paralegal to work on the case, and 5 years that it could potentially take to get to trial, you might not be able to sue. And that's why divorce attorneys don't get sued very often. And that's also why, hey, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. BizNets, very much appreciate that. So that's kind of how the whole paralegal thing works. That's an update on the trial and on super lawyers. And whenever you see an attorney saying they're a super lawyer, you better run, because those are usually the worst lawyers. Just remind everybody that Thomas Giardi was a super lawyer. So that was the morning. That's what we've been working on kind of all over the weekend. I published an article on the Davis Vanguard about Kathleen and Richard tied to Mark Erickson, and all of that was going on. But also what was going on is a couple weeks ago, I went to an administrative hearing in Los Gatos for code enforcement. And that's where I am right now, Los Gatos. And I'm across the street, by the way, from the Los Gatos movie theater that is owned by the town. And playing this week is F1 and the movie The Roses. And I'm going to go see that this week. So if anyone wants to come to the actual movies with me, I am putting that on my list this week to see that. The reason that I want to see The Roses, well, I want to see Brad Pitt because I think Brad Pitt's in that movie. I'm not sure, but the F1 movie looks interesting. It was marketed to me well enough that I'm willing to pay my money to go see it. But The Roses is a spin-off of a movie that was called War of the Roses. That was a movie that was from my generation that we all watched. These people just rip each other apart. I think it was, I don't remember who starred in that movie. If anybody out there remembers, you can put it in the comments. But it was about a couple just fighting over everything and the conflict and it wasn't about the divorce attorneys so much. It was about the couple. And divorce attorneys know that people are going to be conflicted and angry when their divorce initially gets filed. Somebody may have cheated. There's a reason you're getting divorced. Somebody may have cheated. Somebody may have a drug or an alcohol addiction problem. These are human problems that everybody has in every area of life, every political group, every business, everywhere we go, every profession. These are themes that are common to everybody. And divorces are deeply personal, but they are also as life traumatizing as a death of a spouse. So when you get divorced, it's very similar to losing your spouse. You're going on in your life without the other one. And if you got married for the right reasons, that it might be difficult. So the fact that these divorce lawyers prey on that is really problematic. And so what was shocking to me was that I went down to that administrative hearing, which was for code enforcement. The town has been very upset with this one particular resident. Her name is Lindley Hogan, and she has been the subject of restraining orders. She's been 5150'd. She has spoken up in public comment, and there's been an evolution of her life here in Los Gatos that I have been getting public records on and been watching. And it all began in early 2000s when Judge Dancer was being prosecuted for rigging traffic tickets with the Los Gatos police. And she was upset that her ex-husband wasn't paying child support. And so she created some flyers, and she put the flyers, hey, San Joaquin, nice to see you in here. We're talking about dirty super lawyers and trials that we're covering. And we're going to talk about now administrative code enforcement hearings, because you might not ever get divorced or be in family court, but you might find a town coming after you for code enforcement. So this woman had a long history with the town. She lives a block over from the downtown, and this area is considered a historical downtown. It's highly regulated. They tell you when you can cut down trees, whether you can paint your house a certain color, and they have a historical committee that tries to preserve the history of the town that way. And so code enforcement started coming after her because she was renting out rooms in her house. She first had a divorce. Her husband wasn't paying child support, and she was posting flyers through the town, and the police would go and take the flyers down. And I found that through public records. And so it was interesting to me that the police were using kind of code enforcement reasons to take down her flyers. Her flyers were not appropriate. They, you know, if you're an individual man or woman and you haven't paid your child support and you have some various reasons for it, we all know that child support is really, we want everyone to support their children, and we shouldn't need a court to make them do that. But some people do get unfairly charged and burdened with child support, and it can be as bad as medical bills and that kind of thing. So this woman had this long history of this, and then along came the presidential elections in 2016 and 2020, and more recently in 2024. And she was in the political minority, and she posted very large signs supporting her political candidate. And the signs were a little bit of an eyesore. If you live in that area and you've paid $3 or $4 million for a home and you want to live in the historic area, you don't want to feel like your front yard is a political rally every time you walk in and out. And so towns are able to put in certain rules and regulations that benefit everybody, but it has to be First Amendment protected and content neutral, meaning you can make regulations about the signs, and the Supreme Court has ruled on this. You can make regulations about the size of the signs, how long they can be out. They can do that, but they can't make signs where they take down the signs or do code enforcement procedures against people because of the content of those signs. And so this is a very Democratic area. Almost all of the elected officials are Democrats. It's a long-standing, that's just the makeup of this community. And she was in the political minority, and that created some tension. She says things in public comment that is not always favored by the political majority, and she has said things in public comment that makes some of us cringe as a mom. But they're her beliefs, and she has every right to say them, and as long as they're not threatening, then that's what speech is all about. And we want to invite people giving us different opinions, views, and ideas, because if we suppress those ideas, that's when it becomes dangerous. So when I was getting the records on this woman, I was really shocked by just what it seemed like the town bullying her. There were town employees paid with public money that were bullying in emails. The emails said, oh, she's going to be the next Go Postal person, and they were really kind of commenting about that kind of thing. But here was the rub. She had a code enforcement hearing that wasn't really noticed or anything, and in that code enforcement hearing, I walked into it when it got continued to another one. So I have a video about that, and if you notice, that video has very low views consistent with my channel. And the buffering that goes on certain topics on my channel usually means I'm right over the target. And I have never seen more buffering than when I started talking about private judges, super lawyers, and these government code enforcement proceedings. So what was most shocking to me about that proceeding was the code enforcement officer, or judge, the administrative judge in that case, was Jeff Blum. And he told me at the end of that hearing that he was a private judge, a family law attorney, and a mediator. And I thought he did a good job mediating. He was trying to get the woman to see, look, these are the rules. You can take your signs down. You can do it differently and still have your First Amendment right. And on the outside, it looked like he was making an effort, and it looked that it was contained to the process that it should look like. But this woman also has lawsuits against two elected officials, Maria Risto and Rob Moore. And this other man who runs a nonprofit called Democracy Tent, and his name is Lee Fagot, F-A-G-O-T. And the lawsuit is against them. It's for defamation. It's for a number of things. I read it. It was a self-represented filed complaint, which those usually get dismissed, and people have a hard time trying to litigate that themselves. But the town of Los Gatos voted to pay the legal fees of the elected officials. So that means taxpayers are paying for this lawsuit that was brought by a resident who had really been bullied by the town for a long time. Now, taxpayers should have more say in that than their elected officials that are being sued deciding that that's going to happen. But what was most interesting was last night I got a copy of an email that Mr. Blum sent to Ms. Hogan offering to settle up the code enforcement proceeding and also trying to come up with some kind of compromises with the town that would include her dismissing her lawsuit. What? Okay, let me say that again. Ms. Hogan was in a code enforcement proceeding in the town. It was about her political signs. She stands to be penalized, fined, and incur sanctions that could eventually jeopardize her house one day. She also has taxpayers from this town, where she has paid taxes as well, paying for the defense of the people who are litigating against her. And they have filed an anti-SLAPP saying that there shouldn't be a lawsuit because their speech was protected First Amendment activity. And in a SLAPP lawsuit, if the person loses and the other persons are represented by attorneys, you can be ordered to pay thousands of dollars in attorney's fees. So let's go over this slowly for those in the back of the room, mainly the government officials that are doing this. Because I emailed this town attorney, Sidney Wayland, this morning to just say, what is the actual you-know-what? The town had a problem with this woman. She may have mental health issues. She was 5150'd in the past. She has been under stipulated restraining orders, and she is well known in the community. She has filed a number of lawsuits. The town decided that in the last lawsuit that they were going to fund the defense against her. So that's like them being able, it's like family court when one person has a lawyer and the other one doesn't, because this lady is representing herself. And the downside is, in filing the lawsuit, if they throw it out on the SLAPP, she could be responsible for the attorney's fees. But what was interesting was the family law attorney, the divorce attorney, and private judge, Mr. Blum, who is presiding over her code enforcement proceeding, which has nothing to do with the lawsuits, tried to get her to agree to dismiss her lawsuits. And he did so after disclosing that he had been invited to Mr. Fagot's Democracy Tent, and I'm getting text messages that are keeping it hard for me to not laugh. And she was, I can't even remember what I said because that was a good one. I'll have to follow up on that text. So the taxpayers are paying for the defense that could result in her ending up with a staggering legal bill to pay for the defense of the very individuals who are representing the people she's suing from the town. Now, Mr. Faggot is self-represented, but I've looked at his pleadings, and he's handwritten some that looked really sloppy, and then others were typed as if he is getting some legal assistance too. So Democracy Tent, I find out, is a nonprofit. I've lived here in the county since 1990. I've lived in this town since 2010. I've never heard of this nonprofit. And one of the things in the complaint is that Ms. Hogan was evicted from Democracy Tent, not allowed to come back, and the judge who was ruling in her code enforcement proceeding, Mr. Blum, disclosed that he had a relationship with Democracy Tent and that he had been a speaker there. He told me even more. He told me that he had a relationship with, and still continues that relationship with, Judge Towery. And that's the judge that wanted to do the ride-along here in Los Gatos in 2013. So the reason that I came to the Los Gatos Theater, not just because the town owns this theater, making it basically quasi-public property. You still have to pay to go see a movie in there, but the town does own it, and the town is responsible for managing and supervising it. But the reason that I came here is because in 2012, there was a case that was a cyberbullying case involving Audrey Pott. And we're coming up on an anniversary because this happened in September of 2012. And Audrey Pott had been the subject of a highly litigated divorce case. Her stepfather, her non-biological father and stepmother, Larry and Lisa Pott, live here in Los Gatos, and her biological mother lives in Los Altos. And their divorce case was one of the worst in the county. Sheila Pott had been one of those no-doc mortgage brokers, and she had given, she would have, I was told that she would have checks everywhere, $50,000 checks just sitting in drawers that would stale date. And she was very interested in dating men and doing all these different activities. And she had a baby, told the man, Michael Lazarin, that the baby was his, but didn't tell him for a few years, and told him that she was divorced when in fact she wasn't. So he gets dragged into her divorce case. It goes on and on. There was lots of abuse that was reported to police, both in Los Gatos and Los Altos, and very little was done about it. And eventually, the young girl went to a party when she was a sophomore in high school, and she had some experiences and was a victim of kind of cyberbullying right after that. And a few days later, she unlived herself in Los Altos. And so everybody took that case and made it a great big investigation of the juveniles. And the district attorney convinced all these parents in Los Gatos and Saratoga, wealthy areas where there's a lot of voters that support local candidates. He prosecuted the case as a cyberbullying case, never looking at the underlying issues related to the parents. And so I remember that there was a film that Netflix picked up, and Netflix is also here in Los Gatos, and it's down the road a little bit, but Netflix picked up a film called Audrey and Daisy that was about the young girl and her death and everything else. And then after Netflix picked it up, there was a screening here before this was owned by the city, and I remember watching a Facebook live stream where a woman went there and tried to talk about the other narrative behind the movie that wasn't in the movie, and they called the police and they kicked her out of that screening. And so when we work so hard to suppress speech, when we label lawyers super lawyers and they're actually stealing from clients, when we allow paralegals to gossip and kind of influence cases, and we allow family court attorneys, divorce attorneys, and private judges to be over code enforcement, we're just kind of begging for some problems. And so I'm going to be really on this town, and it is not about the people involved in the case. It is about the conduct going on with the government and the courts. And Lisa, when you say coordinated censorship, that is exactly what it is. And so I'm doing these live streams. I know there's only 70 people in here watching. I'm going to leave this up, and I'm trying to show you guys in real time, because I can tell you in a morning, in 40 or 45 minutes, what would take me a year to write about. And so I am going to be doing some more records requests. We're going to be covering the trial. But right now, I am really on this code enforcement thing, because code enforcement affects all of us if you're a property owner. So when you finally own your home, if you are doing everything you want and you do something and the city suddenly decides to tag your house and come after you for code enforcement, you're going to need to hire lawyers. And if you can't afford lawyers, you just might end up getting a divorce attorney being the administrative judge in your case, trying to get you to settle other things. Whoever just said Tyson Green, that is a really good example. And I've talked about Tyson Green before. He was the Santa Clara police officer who was convicted of running a felony chop shop. He kept his pension, because that's the case that taught me, even if you commit a crime, if it's not related to your job, like it was for Judge Dancer, you get to keep your pension. So that means taxpayers will pay Tyson Green for his retirement, even though he's a convicted felon for having run a chop shop. And after he was a convicted felon, Santa Clara County hired him in code enforcement. So if there's any question about the people we're putting in code enforcement, we need to watch them as just as much as we watch the police. So that's it for today, and that's your lesson on super lawyers. I hope the next time you see an attorney say that they are a super lawyer, that you will think of Thomas Giardi and all the other lawyers that engage in the conduct that I'm trying to show you here. Thanks, you guys.